Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and you're all very welcome to this morning's webinar. My name is Sean Fine. I'm the CEO of the Irish Bioenergy Association, and this morning's topic is bioenergy, the Swedish experience, becoming the largest energy source. So we're delighted to welcome you, and before we kick off, I do apologize to our regular attendees. We have some new participants this morning. So just a small bit about the Irish Bioenergy Association. So we were established in 1999. We act as the representative body for the Irish bioenergy industry on the island of Ireland. We cover the sectors of biomass, biogas, biofuels, biochar, wood fuels, and energy crops. Our main work is in the areas of policy lobbying and advocacy. We also try to improve the knowledge and understanding of our sector and provide information to relevant stakeholders. And we have a broad and diverse membership from farmers, foresters, SME companies, technology providers, consultants, academic institutes, financial institutes, and anyone really interested in the bioenergy space. We're currently rolling out a number of research and development projects. We roll out the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme, the Small Scale Biogas Demonstration Project, European Innovation Partnership Project, Interreg 3C project, and also a Just Transition project called the Midlands Bioenergy Development Programme. And further information is available on our website, www.rbia.org. This is webinar number 33 in our series. So all our previous recordings, the recordings of previous webinars are all available on our YouTube channel with links also on our website, and feel free to get in touch if you're interested in presenting at a future webinar. Our next webinar will take place on the 8th of June, webinar number 34, and we will publish full details of this in the coming days. So to introduce this morning's agenda, we will have a presentation from Kjell Anderson, who is Policy and Communications Director at the Swedish Bioenergy Association. We also will be joined by Noel Gavigan, who is the RBA Technical Executive, and we will take any questions you have for our speaker and panelists this morning through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. So to introduce our speaker this morning, we're delighted to have Kjell join us from Sweden. The Swedish Bioenergy Association is leading association across Europe from the point of view of promoting the sector in Sweden. And Kjell attended Stockholm College of Journalism and Stockholm University with a master's in history and political science. He has worked as a journalist and also in communications. He's written books on bioenergy, the Swedish experience, and that's available on the Swedish Bioenergy Association website at www.svebio.se. And Kjell is also chair of Bioenergy Europe Working Group on Sustainability. So we would have regular contact with Kjell through that committee, given the RBA involvement in the Bioenergy Europe organization. And to introduce our topic, we're going to hear this morning how bioenergy is a leading energy source in Sweden. In 2009, bioenergy surpassed oil as the leading energy source for the Swedish energy consumption. The same year, the total use of bioenergy was more than that, than the use of electricity from hydropower and nuclear power together. So bioenergy, and particularly biomass, has a very dominant position in the Swedish heat market, and indeed also has been a significant contributor to the decrease in greenhouse gas emissions of 25% between 1990 and 2014. And the reason for the significant development is that it has received broad political support through many policies, and we're going to hear about those on our presentation this morning. And really, their success story rests on the long-standing tradition of using the natural resources in the Swedish forests as a way of reducing their fossil fuel dependency. So we look forward to hearing the Swedish story this morning, and really look at in envy from an Irish perspective at Sweden, considering the use they have made of their bioenergy resources. And we strive for that at an Irish level and right across Europe. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kjell, and I'd ask you please to share your screen, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. Thanks, Kjell.
Thank you very much, Sean. I will now see if this works. Let's see. There we are. There.
Yes, perfect. Over to you. Thank you.
So, as Sean said, I work as Policy and Communications Director at Svebio, the Swedish Bioenergy Association. And I'm now sitting in our office in Stockholm. No more introduction. The main reason for asking me to speak here, of course, is that we have a very large share of bioenergy already in Sweden. I actually had a presentation at one of your conferences about 6 years ago, at the conference you had at Castle Rock, I think. And I looked at that presentation, and I could have been able to use some of those slides also today, but they are of course updated. And we have seen a continued very positive development also in the last years. This is the Swedish energy use in 2021. And as you can see, bioenergy is by far the largest energy source if you look at it from a user side. We have made this analysis ourselves because the official statistics are a little bit confusing in those. Just like in Eurostat statistics, they record nuclear as from a production point of view. So you include all the excess heat that you produce also in a nuclear power station. But as you only heat up the ocean with it, it doesn't really matter so much to the energy balance or the energy usage in the country. So we have made this analysis, and it shows if you look at the final energy use in all the Swedish sectors and add them up, you reach this conclusion that bioenergy has this, let's see, I see the numbers better, about 38% today of the final energy use. We passed oil as the largest energy source in 2009 already, and the fossil fuels are retreating in the system year by year, whereas the renewable energy sources are expanding. We have right now a very strong development, particularly in wind power in Sweden, but we also have a lot of hydropower from way back. Then let's see if we can show the next picture. No? What happened here? Sorry.
It's moving for me, Kjell.
It's moving for you, but I can't see it.
Swedish electricity production is the slide that I can see. Yeah.
Okay, now good. So this is the electricity production. You can see that the biopower share here is much lower than in the overall energy usage. And of course, the reason is that we have quite a lot of hydropower and we have quite a lot of nuclear power. And wind power is expanding quickly, and also now solar. But biopower is important because it is power source that you can plan. It's dispatchable as compared to wind and solar that are variable and not possible to plan your production. So biopower will play an important role in the coming years, we think, as we are dismantling nuclear power and wind is expanding. The next picture. I don't know why these are so slow. Yeah. Here you can see the effect on the long-term effect on the climate from using more and more bioenergy. We have compared to 1990 the use of bioenergy has increased by about 200% or threefold from 1990 until today. The economy has developed about 70% GDP in Sweden, and the greenhouse gas emissions have decreased by about 35%. I think you said in your introduction 25%, but we have had a very good positive development in the last years. Of course, the numbers for 2020 are very much affected by the pandemic. So maybe they will go back up again, all those curves a little bit next year. But the long-term tendencies are very clear. Sweden has the highest share of renewable energy in the European Union. And this is thanks both to our hydropower, to our expanding wind, but to a very large extent, it's caused by our large use of bioenergy. You can see here that countries like Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, all of these countries have very large shares of bioenergy. So there is a connection. More bioenergy means more renewable energy. And the red dots, they show the target that was imposed in the Renewable Energy Directive in 2009, the targets for 2020. And this is the reporting from Eurostat a couple of months ago to summarize how well the different countries reached their renewable energy targets. Officially, all countries reached the target except France, but some countries like Ireland, Netherlands, Luxembourg, they only reached these targets by statistical transfer from other countries, from countries that had a surplus, like Denmark. Denmark sold a lot of its surplus to these other countries. Also, Estonia sold surpluses. And Sweden didn't do that, so our numbers are accurate. This is a picture of the long-term development, and I will comment that a little bit more in detail. What you can see is bioenergy use in different sectors of society. And we can start then at 1983. We used about a little bit more than 50 terawatt hours altogether. Almost all of that was used in the forest industry, in pulp mills and in sawmills and so forth that had their own boilers for their processes. And the green sector shows small-scale use in residential and services. That is the firewood, mainly in the 1980s, used in single homes out in the country maybe, and small communities. That part has been virtually unchanged through the years. It has we have added some pellets use in small scale, but at the same time, a bit fewer people use firewood probably in the countryside, and we've had some, fewer people live out in these communities maybe today than they did in 1983. Industry has increased some, and the reason is that the forest industry has been expanding a little bit, and also that they have substituted fossil fuels in their own processes for their own byproducts in their boilers. The biggest change has been in district heating, the yellow. During the 1980s and the early 90s, we had some support schemes for investment in heat plants and heat boilers. It was direct subsidies. But in 1991, this was changed into a system with carbon taxation that affected mainly the heat sector. And you can see a very drastic change from 1991 on the yellow up to all the way up to today, but maybe the maximum around 2010. And I will come back to this later. So this was the carbon tax effect. In 2003, we introduced a system called green electricity certificates together with Norway. So there is a subsidy for a new renewable power production. And this favored both wind power and bioelectricity, biopower. And biopower is produced in two different modes. We have a lot of turbines in the pulp mills, but we also have turbines in combined heat and power plants in the district heating system. So you can see the yellow and the purple here as all of that is connected, most of that is connected to district heating. From 2003 to five, I would say, and onward, particularly from 2009, we had a system with tax exemption for biofuels in transport. And from there on, we see a very rapid expansion for bioenergy in the transport sector. So these are the overall effects. And altogether, this has meant a development from around 50 terawatt hours up to almost 150 terawatt hours in this period. So it's an expansion with about 100 terawatt hours. So I will just repeat what these general incentives have been. And we have tried to work. This has been a very clear policy, both from politicians and from us as an advocacy, to favor general long-term incentives to push the market and on a technology neutral, as much as possible, technology neutral system. And this has favored bioenergy solutions because they have often been cost efficient and competitive. We had the carbon tax from 1991. There was also something we call the big tax switch. If you go back to the other picture, you can see the rapid expansion between 2005 or after 2005. And that was caused by this green tax switch in these years, where we increased the carbon tax quite a lot, and at the same time reduced the taxes on income. And today the carbon tax is around 120 euros per ton in all sectors outside the emission trading scheme. The green electricity certificates I told you about, they have been in cooperation with Norway from 2013. And they promoted both wind power and biopower. But today they have no importance at all because of the great expansion of wind power, the prices have gone down totally to almost zero in this certificate scheme. So it is of no importance anymore, which is a problem for new investments in biopower. We had a tax exemption for biofuels. And from 2018, getting really in effect from 2020, we have a new system called the greenhouse gas emissions reduction quota for transport. I will come back to that. For the heavy industry, the main incentive has been the emission trading scheme, the European emission trading scheme from EU. It has had little importance way back, but the last few years, the prices have gone up tremendously or drastically in this sector. So today is a very strong incentive again. Here you can see the development of the carbon tax from 1991 to 2018. You see that we started on a relatively low level. We had a common tax the first year, actually, but there was a strong lobbying from industry. And the result was that Parliament decided to have a divided tax. The industry only paid about 25% of the tax in the household sector and the service sector. And this was true for a very long period. You can see in the green curve, that is what the industry outside ETS, what they have paid for a carbon tax. And the red one is the tax, general tax paid by households and the service sector and others. And but in 2010, about Parliament decided that this reduction in the carbon tax for industry or businesses outside ETS, that this reduction should be abolished and that they should pay the same tax. So we had a drastic increase in the carbon tax for these sectors of society, first in 2011, but then particularly in 2015 and 2018. And now they pay the same high carbon tax as everyone else. And this is sectors of society that don't have emission rights in ETS. So it isn't the heavy industry, it is industries like food industry, it is asphalt works for construction, it is hotels, it's and hotels are in the service sector, they paid the full tax all the time. But there are several types of industries, mining, for example, and others that now have a full tax. And it has meant a new market for, particularly for the pellets industry, because now they can compete with gas oil and gas in these sectors of the industry. The major change then at this, was the change in district heating, and that we introduced in district heating in a broad manner in Sweden from the 1950s and 60s onward. And these pictures show the major reason for district heating in Sweden. It wasn't climate at that time. No one talked about climate. It wasn't the cost, but it was environmental protection. We had great problems with exhaust and smoke from both from coal, use of coal boilers, oil boilers, but also wood boilers in the cities and towns. And this is a city of Sundsvall in middle north Sweden. I think the upper picture was taken sometime around 1950 or a bit earlier, late 1950s about. And then they built a big district heating plant and connected hundreds of houses, thousands of houses in this city. And now almost everyone has district heating in Sundsvall. And you can see a picture taken from the same viewpoint at about the same time in winter today, or this was taken maybe 10 or 20 years ago, but at the time when they all had district heating. You can see the tremendous difference in air quality. Today we have biomass or waste used in district heating in almost all of Sweden's 290 municipalities. Svebio and our magazine Bioenergy, we make these maps to show the use of bioenergy in Sweden, both for heating, for biopower, for fuel, biofuel production, and so forth. And this one is for heating. And there are 560 heat plants using wood chips, pellets, peat, municipal waste, or waste heat from forest industries. So they are bio-based, basically. And 90 of these plants are bigger and have electricity production. And together with the turbines in the industry, they have a total capacity of about 4,300 megawatts. Here you can see the use of different fuels in district heating. The green down there is the biomass, and something called other fuels is mainly fossil waste, the fossil part of municipal waste, but it's also some peat. There are some heat pumps, and there is a very little fossil fuels used. The coal now is probably almost zero, because we closed the last large coal boiler in Stockholm in 2019. And there is a little bit of oil and gas, but that is also almost out of the system today, because we have introduced more carbon tax on those boilers. The biomass used for this district heating is very diverse, different kinds of biomass. It is byproducts from sawmills and pulp factories. We have a very large forest industry. So of course, there is a lot of byproducts. It's bark, sawdust, chips, discarded wood and shavings, so forth. We have forest residues of different kinds that we take out directly from the forest, tops and branches from the clear cutting and from thinnings. We have stumps to a very small extent though, trees of low value. There is rotten wood, there is splintered wood, there is fire damaged wood and so forth. All of this is threatened right now because of a new decision by the Environmental Committee in the European Parliament, where they say that they will ban the use of all these primary forest residues. That would be a catastrophic decision if it was taken on EU level to the Swedish biomass use in district heating. We get material from parks and gardens, landscaping wood, of course, pellets and briquettes and wood powder used mainly for top load boilers used in at the coldest days in middle winter. We use quite a lot of recycled wood. We also import quite a lot of recycled wood, and we use bio oils and tall oil, which is a byproduct in the pulp mills, and this is also used mainly for top load. But whereas district heating and heating is success story, the transport sector is still a problem, of course, because we still use quite a lot of petroleum products in the transport sector, just as all European countries do. You can see here the use of petroleum products over the years in Sweden, where the use in households, the dark upper part, has almost diminished to zero, because we have switched almost all oil boilers using heating oil in households to district heating, or to pellets, or to firewood, or to electric heat pumps and so forth. And we have reduced the use in industry quite a lot. You can see that at the bottom, quite a lot of that use was in the forest industry, but we still have quite a large usage of oil products in the transport sector. And for Sweden, if we are to reach the targets from the European Union and our own climate targets, and reach net zero emissions by 2045, which is now our target, we have to get rid of the fossil fuels in transport. That is the only area where we really can do a big difference in the coming years. So action in the transport sector is the priority number one in Sweden. And we have done rather well so far. We are much better than, if I may boast a little bit again here, than all the other European Union countries. There was a common target in EU for 2020 to reach 10% renewable fuels in the transport sector. And this is the result, according to Eurostat. And EU reached the target of 10%, and most countries managed to do it. But Sweden, we had an overshoot of about 3 times as high percentage as the other countries. But you have to mind, though, that this is with double counting for biofuels from residues, which means that this is fake statistics to some extent, and the Swedish number is lower. The actual number is lower, but the actual numbers are lower also for almost all the other countries. Fake statistics from the European Union. This is a picture of the Swedish target and what we have to do in the transport sector. The decision taken by the Swedish Parliament is that we should reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from road transport by 70% from 2005 to 2030. We have until 2020 come quite a ways, as you can see, but we still have much to do. And in the coming years, we have to reduce the use of fossil petrol and diesel drastically. This is the what we use today. This is in Swedish, I'm sorry, but you can probably figure it out. The circle to the left is the total use of transport fuels. In Sweden, diesel accounts for about 44%, benzene is petrol, that's about 30%, and renewable fuels, förnybart, that's about 26%. Out of the renewables, 1.3 is electricity, the rest is biofuels. And among biofuels, the biggest share is HVO, hydrogenated vegetable oils. So that is biodiesel, drop-in biodiesel that you can mix freely with regular diesel into the cars. And RME is the rapeseed-based biodiesel. Then we have quite a lot of biogas in transport. And we have some ethanol. We have now E10, so we have 10% mix into regular diesel, regular petrol, and then we have a market for E85 high blend ethanol for flexi fuel cars. I have one of those cars myself. Let's see, where do I have them? There. So the main incentive to reach this climate target for road transport is called the greenhouse gas emissions reduction quota. The reduction is based on life cycle assessment according to the EU calculation methodology in the Renewable Energy Directive. Every distributor of petrol or diesel fuel must fulfill the quota for delivered fuel quantity. There is a heavy penalty for if the quota is missed. Final reporting in April the following year. Possibility to trade the quota between companies, and there is some flexibility also between petrol and diesel quotas. Biogas and pure biofuels like these high blends, E85, ED95, which is an ethanol bus fuel, HVO 100, 100% biodiesel and B100. These fuels have tax exemptions and they are not included in the quota. And all quotas within all fuels within the quota are fully taxed. These are the quota levels from now until 2030. And you can see that the diesel fuel quota is quite drastically increasing. From today in 2022, it's supposed to be 30.5% within regular diesel, or the reduction of, but the quantity will be similar. In petrol fuels, it's now 7.8%, which allows for 10% mix or blend in regular petrol. Now, of course, with a very high prices on fuels right now, and is politically very sensitive what we do with these quotas. They have actually been decided by Parliament, but all of a sudden everyone is getting nervous because of the very high prices on diesel and petrol. So they have decided to freeze the quota increase from 2022 to 2023, and hopefully we will be back on track from 2024 and onward to up to 2030. But there is an uncertainty right now, and they are evaluating the whole system. And it may be that these quota increases will be revised a bit. we will see. We are worried about this because the quotas guarantee that there is an quickly expanding market, and this is important for investments in new production capacity. We make a map every year also from our newspapers and show how production is increasing in all of the Scandinavian or Nordic countries. There is a very large number of projects for new production of biofuels in our countries. Most of these are based on waste streams, different kinds, or on new processes to use cellulosic materials and lignin from the forest industry or from forest residues and so forth. So many of them are in the pipeline being planned. A few are now being built. But the total capacity of this is quite tremendous. It's tens of terawatt hours of planned capacity here, up to around 50 terawatt hours altogether in the coming years. Here are some examples. Sunpine in Piteå, they make biodiesel from tall oil, which is the lipids, or the fat substances in black liquor in the pulp mills. Adesso in Stenungsund, they make rapeseed diesel. Agroethanol, it's an extremely successful ethanol plant. They have a greenhouse gas reduction level of about 95% compared to petrol, because they use as input energy, they use bioenergy from a nearby CHP. They produce renewable carbon dioxide. They produce large amounts of protein feed, and they are now working on producing human protein feed from that factory. And then there finally is one of the traditional regular refineries that are being rebuilt to use more and more biocomponents. Finally, just a short comment. What shall we do about Russia? I couldn't help. I had to say something about this. We have to stop the Russian oil and gas in the European Union. Coal is already banned, and imports of wood chips and pellets have been stopped practically. Solid biofuels, wood chips, pellets, waste to energy, and the more district heating are among the quickest and most cost-efficient ways to replace these fossil fuels. Yet, and this is very disturbing, the European Commission focuses almost only on solar, wind, and hydrogen. Hydrogen is mentioned 45 times in the Repower EU document that was released a few days ago, but bioenergy is only mentioned in one paragraph. There is a huge problem in Brussels and in the European Union system with negative attitudes towards bioenergy. Instead, they only focus on biogas, but I think the plans are totally unrealistic. The plan is to increase the biogas production 12-fold in just 8 years, which I think is not possible. But we should, of course, do as much as we can on biogas, but instead we also should focus on other types of bioenergy. One good example of what can be done quickly, relatively quickly, is the example of Lithuania. This is the fuel use in Lithuanian district heating. Through the years, they have substituted almost all the Russian imported Gazprom gas for biomass and for some municipal waste. They are now ready to open up another 2 CHP plants in Vilnius, so that almost all of that gas will be gone within a few months. This could be done in country after country, of course, particularly in Eastern and Central Europe. Different countries are more or less dependent on fossil fuels still. I showed you started with one of those pictures of the share of renewable energy in the European Union countries. And we must say that the European Union has not been successful in switching over to renewable energy in general, or switching away from fossil fuel dependency. We have to remember that 90% of the fossil fuels are imported to the European Union. And here you can see the countries' names here are in Swedish. I'm sorry for that, but you can see that Ireland, for example, is quite still to more than 80%, was in 2019 dependent on fossil fuels, whereas we are down to around 35% in Sweden. Let's see. I think I'm done there, and I think I'll stop sharing. I hope I haven't spoken too long.
Not at all, Kjell, that's great. Thanks very much for your presentation. It's very interesting to hear how Sweden has implemented policies and actions over the last number of decades, and where you are compared to ourselves here in Ireland. So just to bring in my colleague and Noel Gavigan as well into the discussion, and maybe if I open up just to give maybe Kjell just an opportunity to catch your breath after the presentation, and maybe just ask Noel to comment maybe on what, Noel, are the key takeaways from Kjell's presentation for you and the Swedish deployment of bioenergy, and what lessons could we take from that at an Irish level?
It's, I suppose the first thing is it's astonishing the progress that's been made and where Sweden is at in comparison to where we are ourselves. It's quite embarrassing actually when you look at where we are in comparison. I mean, the level of removal of fossil fuels that have gone through over the last couple of decades is remarkable. Looking at things even simple as carbon tax, we're at 41 euros per tonne there. Looking at the graph that Kjell put up there, they had that carbon tax 25 years ago. So, and I think what the important lessons from that is we have to start putting these policies in place and acting, making sure they start acting on the market. And it's over the last 3 decades that they've made all that progress. So I suppose there's a lot of key things within all that. I was taking a lot of notes through it. I mean, it was a very interesting discussion, because I remember Kjell presenting this before to us or something similar, but to see how far it's moved on, and we're in a better position to look at it ourselves. Huge movements there in district heating, which is something we can look at here in Ireland, because we're seeing the retrofit programs are not going to work to where we were expecting them to, or where policy was expecting them to. On the transport fuel, some very interesting things there. I'd like to talk a bit more to Kjell about in particular these greenhouse gas emission reduction quotas, because I see a figure there of 30% required for diesel. So how are they going about that? If we tried to put in 30% here, I'm sure there will be an outright war in terms from the industry, from the fossil fuel industry. So how that has been implemented. The pricing, I mean, obviously we're seeing fossil fuel prices. It'd be interesting to see how Sweden has found the last couple of months in the last year in terms of where gas prices have been increasing quite a lot for us, where oil prices have been increasing. So how has that affected, or how has all this work protected Sweden from that volatility? I know biomass will also rise a certain amount. And look, the expansion of biodiesel and ethanol plants right across the country, looking at producing food crops, food protein from that as well. I mean, it's just shows how the industry fits into so many facets of what we're trying to do. So I mean, being able to produce a co-product for the food industry really shows the fact that biomass, in particular, say ethanol in that example, it doesn't take away from the food crop. We're getting with both protein in the grains, and we have starch, and the starch you could turn that into your energy, and the protein, which is what we're short of here in Europe. We import loads of protein from the Americas, in the form of soybean, and particularly here in Ireland. So being able to produce more protein here, which is what we're short of, while also producing biofuel, is very interesting. And again, look, finally, then I would share his views on the Repower EU. Huge concentration on hydrogen there. We're looking at from a starting point of 0 to producing 6 million tons of hydrogen in 8 years, when we've no infrastructure, either for producing it or using it. So it's we'd share his views on that, and increasing biogas by 12-fold is obviously a huge thing, and very little on biomass. When we see the Swedish example, we see any of the expansion that's going on here in Ireland at a much smaller rate, but biomass is a system that just fits in, and really can deliver.
Okay. Thanks very much, Noel. That's very good insight. So if I could bring Kjell in, I suppose the one question I'd have, and there's a couple of questions through the Q&A tab, which we'll come to in just a moment. So if I could ask Kjell, in terms of the public's embracing the bioenergy opportunity, has there been any issues in terms of the development of bioenergy in terms of public engagement, particularly around planning, around other issues, as the sector has developed in Sweden?
I would say in general, no. I mean, if we have had a discussion, it has been the very last few years concerning forestry in general. And we sometimes they attack us sort of as a representative for modern forestry. But this is very much another issue. It's a debate about biodiversity in forests, and of course our boreal Nordic forestry with coniferous trees, pines and spruces, very large areas. We use a clear cut to harvest these forests. And this is also questioned a lot. So there is a discussion concerning forestry in general. But if you look at the use of bioenergy in general from way back, there has been very little debate on that. And construction of these heat plants, in many cases, there were other heat plants at the same location. I mean, but they were fueled with oil. You could see, if you look at the presentation later, you can see that we had almost only oil, heating oil, also for the district heating plants in the 1970s. 80–90% was imported oil. And then we replaced that with biomass and peat to some extent, and also some coal to start with. And the reason was that we were so dependent on imported oil. And we had the oil crisis in 1973 and the second one in 1979. And there was big political agreement that we had to get away from this dependency on imported oil. And they looked to what resources do we have? What kind of domestic resources do we have? And they said, well, we have the forests and we have the peat. So that's when they started subsidizing this transition. At the same time, we had a huge debate on nuclear power, and the environmental movement in Sweden was fiercely against nuclear. So, and they looked for alternative energy sources. And one of the easiest to use was bioenergy. So we had very good cooperation with the environmental movement and have had it all along until the last few years.
And just on that then, as a follow-on from that, because I know you're the chairman of the Bioenergy Europe Sustainability Working Group, and you referenced in your presentation the issues around the environmental lobby at a Brussels level and their opposition to wood-based energy, and how that's a risk for Sweden and a risk for the whole of Europe, and everyone involved in forestry, bioenergy, and all of this space. So could you just perhaps comment on that in terms of maybe give an update from your role as the chairman of the committee in terms of where this is moving and what are the steps from here, considering the European Parliament Environmental Committee position. So if you maybe just talk us through that for a minute or two, please.
I could give you a half an hour presentation on that.
Yes.
It's big and complicated, but I think there are 3 points that are sensitive here. One is that they want to introduce some kind of a cascading, which means that we will have a regulation of what kind of raw materials we can use for different purposes. from an administrative or political standpoint, instead of using the market to sell and buy for producers and users in a way that you do in a free market economy, like the European Union is supposed to be. That's the first point. The second point is that the environmental side is trying to influence the forestry methods, and forestry is a national competence actually. But biodiversity, of course, you could say, and energy and climate are common EU policies, so they clash here. And what they want to do is to try to restrict, for example, certain methods like clear cutting, which is a necessary method to in modern forestry to produce timber at a reasonable price and compete on the global market. So that's the second point. The third point, which is the most disturbing right now, is that the Environment Committee in the European Parliament has voted in favor of a paragraph to ban practically all primary biomass from forests, including residues from clear cutting and from thinning and stumps and so forth. So these forest fuels that make up quite a large part of our fuels in the district heating plants, we shouldn't be able to use anymore. And for the coming decades, we want to build a production of advanced biofuels from these feedstocks. And so this is going to stop effectively this development. It's very disturbing, and we have to stop this in any way possible. And you have to influence your government to take part in the process and to stop these kind of restrictions.
And we were involved in that process. Myself and Noel have engagements with various personnel within government departments on these issues on a regular basis on behalf of our members. So if I could just come to the questions, and I think really you probably have answered the question from Charles, and thanks Charles for joining us this morning and for your question. So Brussels' attitude to wood energy, why are they not more positive as careful management? As carefully managed, it is carbon neutral. So that's a question from Charles. So perhaps you really probably have answered that. And to summarize, I suppose, really it's the environmental lobby at Brussels level which are our challenge. And also that's impacting on the influence that they're having on the European Commission and the various different segments of the European decision-making process, Parliament and Commission. So perhaps, Kjell, you want to comment further on that?
Yeah, this whole issue of carbon neutrality, I don't know why this has all of a sudden become such a huge issue with the discussions about payback times and so forth, because the forests in Europe, in fact, in every European countries, the forests are growing more than we are harvesting. So we are net taking up carbon dioxide in our forests. But of course, if you look at a single tree or a single harvesting area, then of course you get a payback time before you have as much carbon at that stand or that place. But we have to look at the whole forest, of course. And on a global level, IPCC and the Climate Convention and so forth, I mean, they agree totally that biomass is carbon neutral. And therefore, we also, in emission trading and so forth, we count it as zero. But this kind of reasoning has got hold in simplified public debate and among environmental activists who think that you shouldn't cut a single tree.
And Kjell, just if I could, because I think this is important for our attendees this morning and also for people that might look at this webinar recording afterwards, can you just explain, you mentioned about the Parliament Environment Committee that have issued this recommendation around banning the use of forest residues. Can you just maybe explain for our attendees what other committees are involved in this decision And ultimately, it's not the environmental committee having full and total say in terms of this. There's a broad grouping of decision makers here. So maybe just if you could simplify that for our attendees in terms of how the decisions are going to be made in terms of these issues and what the various committees that are involved are.
Yeah. First of all, the Energy and Transport Committee, ITRE committee, they will also have a say on this, and they may change this, even though it's supposedly the Environmental Committee has control of these paragraphs. But in the end, there will be a vote in plenary in the whole Parliament, and that will probably be right after summer in September. And then after that, there will be negotiations between the Parliament and the Commission and the Council, where all the EU member state governments, states have a say. And finally, there will be a decision, maybe late in the spring or the fall or midwinter sometime.
Okay. And just to follow up, because there's a question there from Stacey, and Stacey said, I'm shocked at what Kjell is saying about the EU banning of forest residues. And for Noel, Sean and Kjell, what can ordinary folk do to influence this? Seems a total lack of joined up thinking by our elected leaders. So I suppose what I would say from an Irish Bioenergy Association perspective, all our members of the public, and indeed any people with interest in this area, should contact their elected representatives, being their MEPs, to clearly advocate that they're strongly opposed to the banning of any or restriction of the use of forest residues in our energy systems. And also then, so that's one element, or one leg of a three-pronged stool in terms of the decision-making process. The other important one is the Council of Ministers, and obviously we can influence the Council of Ministers through our own ministers and our own Parliament and elected representatives at an Irish level. So that's the second area. So certainly you could potentially get in touch with your elected representatives that can influence at a government level, can influence some of the decisions and the view that will be taken forward. So that's how really ordinary citizens and interested parties can influence the decision-making process. One, by getting in touch with your MEP, and two, by talking to your elected representatives and highlighting your concerns about this particular area. And then we're hoping that some sense will prevail in the European Parliament in terms of the plenary, that the Parliament won't adopt a position that proposes a banning of forest residues, because that would certainly be a backward move from a European perspective in terms of our decarbonisation agenda. So I hope that kind of clarifies on that, and thanks, Stacey, for your question. So if I could move on, there's another question here, and maybe if I could bring in Noel and Kjell on this one. So as a forester and a wood fuel producer, Michael would like to obtain more information on biomass production from tops and branches, and where can this be obtained? And that's from Mike, and Mike is based in England, he says. So Noel, if you could maybe outline what our members are doing in this particular area, and maybe some of the information you can provide through the WFQA.
Yeah, we have a number of small number of members here in Ireland who are producing brash material, as we call it, so tops and branches. So it's a very useful material, particularly for larger boilers, that can, because it's a slightly different material you wouldn't put into your smallest boilers, but it definitely does in the megawatt range. So if you're district heating plants or your large industrial plants, it's an ideal fuel for that. There is different harvesting methods, some baling, some roadside chipping. It depends on, we've seen both methods being used here in Ireland. Predominantly, I think the roadside chipping appears to be the most popular and the most economic. We did do a report ourselves on this about 10 years ago through one of the, I'm trying to think of the name of the project we were completing at the time, but that's on our website somewhere buried in it. I'm sure we can dig it out again for people, where we did a detailed study on the different options and how we can harvest brash.
And if Mike wants to get in touch with us, feel free to send an email to us or send an email to Kjell. I'm sure we'd all be able to provide information to you on this particular aspect. Our contact information are available on our website. and happy to discuss this further with you if it's something that's of interest to you. So I think, Kjell, I don't know if you have any final comments on before we conclude, any concluding remarks just before we finish, and thanks very much for joining us this morning. So do you want to just say any concluding remarks?
Yeah, just a short, very short added point. It isn't only forest residues, it's also low quality wood and wood that isn't demanded from industry, for example. So it can be quite a lot of roundwood that also is used for bioenergy and should be used for bioenergy because it doesn't have any other use. So it's not only the tops and branches.
Yeah, we would see a lot of first thinnings being used wholesale for that.
Yeah. Okay, and about slash use, or of course, both Sweden and Finland has a lot of knowledge about how to harvest these products. And I can see, if you forward me questions, we can see what we can find in English that is good information on this.
Just two follow-on points there. Just thanks to Brian for joining, and for he just said fantastic presentation, Kjell, many thanks. And then I see there's a follow-up has come in there from Stacey as well. Another question on brash material in Ireland. The current standard for felling and reforestation, and in brackets October 2019, effectively outlaws brash harvesting. Are RB aware of that, and are you lobbying for a change in that? Now, I have to say a lot of our members are harvesting brash, so we'd like to discuss that further with you, Stacey. So perhaps if you could get in touch with us and send us an email. And my email is Sean, SEANFINAN @irbea.org. So, and Noel as well. If you email either or both of us, we can talk to you further on that.
Yeah, there's an extreme danger of fire risk by leaving brash in the forest. So it's a critical management piece as well.
Okay, so unfortunately we've run out of time. Thanks very much to Kjell for presenting this morning. Thanks to Noel, and also thanks very much to Teresa O'Brien for making it all happen behind the scenes. Thank you all. Thanks to our attendees for actually getting in touch with us, and for our logging in this morning, all our attendees, and for your number of questions that you have posed. And we look forward to meeting you on the next webinar, which will take place in 2 weeks' time. So we leave it at that, and just to say, I hope you all have a good day, and thank you very much. See you now.